So yeah, it's like quite a drawn out title, to be honest. It's fundraising events and campaigns lead at Cranstoun. And it's a role that is about promoting the organisation as a whole. Promoting our strategies, so through campaigns, through events, um, in terms of campaigning for change, for the wider, policy change throughout the UK, so that we can, essentially do things that need to be done, like deliver things like, um, you know, provide diamorphine to people who are dependent on street heroin, so, pharmaceutical heroin essentially. Do things like overdose prevention centres, provide those in areas where people are publicly injecting. And, part of my job as well is that I'm trying to raise some funds for the organisation so that, that we can go out and do these things. Because in the past these types of organisations who, like Cranston, who deliver frontline services, have always been relying on commissioned contracts, and we'd like to do things. Of course, we still want to do that type of work, where we deliver frontline services to people, but we'd like to do things a little differently, and be able to go out and do stuff that's unique, that's not been done, unique in this country, that's not been done, that we've learned from international best practice in other countries.
Well, here you go, folks. This is week 2 of trying this new thing. So we're going to go in instead of a cold opener. There you go. There's a little bit of background. Hopefully a teaser. Hopefully now you're going to be very interested to hear all about Peter and his work. This isn't actually his first visit to us. It's a second one. It's been nearly 3 years. It was January 2021, I think. You were one of the first guests that I had on the podcast. So I'm really interested to hear about what you've been up to and what is sort of going on in your world, as it were. But before then, somebody dropped a comment not that long ago in a video asking about Gary Hughes. I went to visit him this weekend in prison. He's in a category D open prison now, so he is in a much better environment. He seems to be thriving in it. He looks very well, very healthy, very happy. I have some very good news to report. He is looking to be released on tag in early February of 2024. And yeah, it was just great to see him, great to catch up with him. He's very eager, as we are and have been trying for a while, to get him a script inside. But the systems at play are not quite allowing us to do that. So basically, we're going to throw a party for Gary when we pick him up, and we're going to get him straight to his doctors, get him a script, and make sure that when the tag man comes around, he's not getting in any trouble when Gary is out. Hopefully this time, the last time he needs to go inside and basically sacrifice himself for our sins, as it were, as a cannabis community, because he has, well, frankly, served us for like 2 decades at this point, trying to give us, as a culture and as a loose community, a space to consume and to get together. So, yeah, there's my little update on Gary. And don't worry, he will be back on mid-February. Already booked him in on a slot just after Valentine's Day to record on the podcast. So you'll get to hear from the man himself then. All right, let's jump straight over then into today's guest, who is a Scottish direct action activist who operated the UK's first mobile safe injection site and overdose prevention centre in Glasgow. He is, as well as you've just heard there, the fundraising lead, and I can't remember what he said on the other one, charity lead, at Cranstoun, who are a social justice and harm reduction charity founded way back in 1969. How are you doing, Peter Krykant?
Very well, thank you very much. Very well. Yeah, it's been a super busy year, and looking forward now really to a little bit of relaxation over Christmas and New Year this year.
Excellent. Yeah, we are quickly getting there, aren't we? Obviously, the darker nights. I'm not complaining about the weather. You cannot mark that off your bingo card, folks. Obviously, the clocks have changed. So it's a bit darker. I'm the same. We're winding down, prepping for next year, but I think you've earned a well-earned break this year. Obviously, you've been up to a hell of a lot. I keep up with you on social media, and basically every time I've looked for the past several months, you've been all over the bloody world. So, what have you been up to, brother? How's things going?
Yeah, well, I mean, this year has just been, it's been a lot of traveling, a lot of conferences, a lot of campaigning, a lot of TV, a lot of media, newspaper articles. The earlier this year in April, I was lucky enough to get to travel out to the Harm Reduction International Conference out in Melbourne, Australia, and lucky enough to present at that conference. That's been followed by trips to Strasbourg to present at the annual Drug Consumption Room conference, and then trips to Denmark to campaign and visit facilities over there, drug user unions over there. And just recently, a trip over to Phoenix, Arizona to be part of the Drug Policy Alliance conference, and trips down to Mexicali and Tijuana to visit drug consumption rooms and support services for people who use drugs in those cities, which is eye-opening. Those trips were really eye-opening. I'm sure we'll get into them a little bit further into the podcast, but yeah, super busy year, and obviously, as well as the travel for work, my partner lives in Barcelona, so a lot of trips, not work related, back and forward to Barcelona and Mallorca as well, and some cool things. Managed to get out to the Mallorca Live Festival this year and see the Chemical Brothers and the Cooks and the Black Eyed Peas were the three main headline acts, and yeah, so busy year, and it's probably a little bit early to talk about Christmas, but to be honest, I'm just looking forward to a couple of weeks of kicking back and relaxation.
No, I bet. I mean, we're still beating the supermarkets who had their shit out, I think, before Halloween this year. So yeah, we're doing all right. We can mention Christmas. We can mention it. We're not going to play any bloody Mariah Carey songs on this podcast. So don't worry, folks. Don't worry. No, that's awesome. I mean, let's sort of wind this back a bit. Obviously, I'll direct people to episode 13 in the links below, guys. That's where you can get sort of the first conversation me and Peter had. So that's more of the in-depth of what you had previously done. But what I'd kind of like to ask you now is the evolution. So sort of, I think last time we spoke, you had just got the ambulance and that had been converted, and you were having some issues with the police and sort of trying to cancel your insurance. So yeah, can you tell us sort of where you've gone sort of from there to here? It seems like it's gone a real extreme swing from one to the other. Of literally, it feels like the apparatus of the state trying to crush your best efforts, to the world now kind of recognizing you and going, no, this man's doing some real good.
Yeah, I mean the whole like unsanctioned overdose prevention site that I ran in Glasgow, it was the most challenging time in my life. It was obviously unsanctioned. There was no official sort of source for funding for that service. There was obviously lots of media and attention around all of that. Obviously I didn't have a team of people around me to help with that. The interaction with the police, the interaction with the media, and ultimately, obviously, the people that were coming regularly to inject drugs in the back of the van, like we couldn't really support them with the whole holistic approach that you'd like to be able to offer people who are, unhoused and injecting drugs, in these like really horrible conditions. Like some of the services I've visited over the last few years has placed me in a position running that service where I've got a public profile. That's the main thing. I've got this public profile where I've been able to get a large social media following. I've been able to get on to, just in the last couple of months as well, I've been able to do a lot of, like, constantly over the last 3 years, but the last couple of months, be on live TV a couple of times up here in Scotland, get into these spaces which people who use drugs don't often get into, and I feel like I've got a duty to take what I've done there with the van. Now that Scotland's said that that we will have an official facility and it's been approved by the Scottish Lord Advocate, the profile I've got a duty to really emphasize the point about the war on drugs, which is essentially a war on people, and that failed narrative now that we've had for such a long time, which is, not just punishing people for their own rights and their own bodily autonomy, but also, punishing society as a whole. Like we're spending so much money on sending people to prison, and this right-wing narrative that drug use is bad, and some of that is drug exceptionalism as well. Like having just been out to California and Arizona, where cannabis is legal, you know, and you can go in and not directly buy magic mushrooms, but buy the extracts from magic mushrooms and the shops and stuff. You know, we need to be, as I believe, as a drug using community, you know, we need to be banding together and not have that drug exceptionalism. Because let's get it right, heroin is a plant-based medicine.
Yeah, that's gonna piss off a lot of people, but it is 100% fucking true.
Yeah.
No, I couldn't agree more. It's this drug exceptionalism you speak of is something that has boiled my piss for a long time in this space. I mean, I initially started this as a well, yeah, just a drug law abolitionist. Effectively, I was quite a radical. I was like, no, you give it to the people. We'll figure out our shit. If there's any problems after the fact, then you can have some sort of intervention. But
Yeah.
it's no different than somebody going to the doctor with obesity or whatever else. So you don't then challenge the food or whatever the thing. You allow people the freedom and the option and give them best education and practice. Ideally, obviously. But yeah,
Yeah.
that narrative of what's happening sort of with cannabis is over here. It used to be drugs and alcohol, and now there's like drugs, alcohol, cannabis, and then maybe psychedelics or these other kind of quite often ill-fitting terms that are there because of the potential profitability of these substances. I mean, ultimately they're packaged and come in the guise of, look, we can help these people, we can help these people, and that is true. That is, no one's denying that. But it's the motivation and the apparatus behind it that is so hard to critique, because then you hear people going, don't piss on our parade. You know, that's you've got you and you've got yours and whatever else. And I agree, there has to be a unifying call to people that consume drugs, and I would ideally say that would include caffeine, that will include sugar, that will include alcohol, tobacco. We have a right to do these things, and if we still are informed that they may cause cancer, they may cause addiction, they may cause da 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 da, we still should have that free right. And there's a lot of people have lost that idea, and as you're seeing, especially in the west coast of America, like this kind of corporate egoic hippy dippy microdose mechanism that kind of manifested out of Silicon Valley, who kind of took LSD and the idea of, you know, expanding your universe and moving forward to, no, let's microdose it to improve productivity.
Yeah.
You know, it's
Yeah, I get you, and like that's kind of what I see. You know, I see that like you go into the cannabis dispensaries. You know, it's very commercialized, and the certainly the two states where I've visited cannabis dispensaries. You know, it's a very commercialized industry already. You know, it's completely socially acceptable, and it's kind of like you pull cannabis out of what was previously just another unacceptable drug into this acceptable society, alongside alcohol and tobacco and caffeine and sugar, etc. And at the same time as pulling cannabis out of the unacceptability, I think you're what I am worried about is that other drugs are being pushed into the less acceptability area. You know, so the drugs that are that again, that term drug exceptionalism, where in the commercialization. And I think there's much better models as we move towards regulation than the American or the Canadian model of regulation, which is primarily, I know there's some good examples of regulation, in New York and certain parts of Canada, there's some good examples of regulation. But I think, the examples that we should be looking at is much more the social club model, the model where people who are currently consumers of cannabis in the UK are the people that are involved in the industry. That social clubs can be set up and run by people who consume cannabis, and the cannabis can be grown by the experts, and they're not for profit. They're looking at, building the community around it, and not, not just another tobacco and alcohol industry, and again, it's like I look at the drug user movements in other countries, and this is the point. This is the point for me in the UK, where like we are so far behind, because you've got, in places like Canada, where you've got Vandu, and then you've got like in Catalonia, you've got the Catalan network of people who use drugs. You've got the psychedelic and the cannabis community pulling together with drug users from other types of drug users from other communities and going out in marches together. You know, I was just out in Catalonia on the 27th of July this year, which is International Drug Users Remembrance Day, you know, and you've got the cannabis and the psychedelic and the ketamine community work marching alongside people who use heroin and cocaine and other types of drugs, and you know, demonstrating with them outside the city hall, you know, like and being together as a community. And I worry that we've not got that togetherness here in the UK. You know, obviously, you know, we're a million miles away from in my opinion, we're a million miles away from reform for any type of drugs. You know, like as we were discussing before we went live, you know, like with the nitrous oxide, you know, like laughing gas now being moved from, you know, moved into being a criminalized substance, you know, primarily consumed by young kids. What are we going to do making that a criminal substance? You know, like all we're going to do is criminalize young kids, you know, give them criminal records which can potentially follow them about the rest of their lives, you know, like. And then that's another frustration when you look at some of the regulation in the States. You know, you go into you know, like places like Phoenix, you know, Arizona as an example, where cannabis is now regulated. You've got dispensaries everywhere, but you've got tens of, you know, thousands and thousands of people still sitting in prison for cannabis-related offences. You know, at the same time as like Joe Bloggs can now walk in and order 30% THC or 20% THC, you know, whatever percentage of THC you want, but there's some young kid still serving another 2 years in a prison for selling some THC. You know, it's a upside down world we live in, man.
It really is. And this is where I take flack for, I guess, politicizing the situation, but ultimately it is a political situation, and to me it's under the current form of neoliberal capitalism, every problem can only be solved, is only allowed to be solved if it has a profit margin. And that's the issue. They've suddenly found a way that whoa, we can have both. Them people on the street that grow it in their bedrooms, that's skunk and it's dangerous and they're crazy people. But our wonderful friends that happen to be giving us all of this money and backhanders and jobs for the boys, that's magic stuff. They're in white coats. And it's classism defined. And it's the drug war for me has always been a class war, because the higher up you are, it becomes a fine. You just have to pay that unbelievably good lawyer. You have to then have gone to the good school and go, oh, Your Honor, you know, our Jeremy, you know, he doesn't deserve a drug conviction. He went to Eton. Do you know what I mean? It's that kind of bullshit that predicates this. And they're coming along as our persecutor and now going, oh, no, you're right. We'll protect you now. We'll sort everything and take away from us the culture that we have built in opposition to them, the defiance that has defined our lives. Do you know what I mean? I am every much everything that has been done to me by the system as I am the experiences I have sought as an individual. More so in some ways, because I've lived under this war I've been a drug user all of my adult life. Multitude of drugs. I happily identify as so, because to me it is repugnant, it is immoral of me to lie about that. I do a disservice to everybody that sacrificed themselves before me, and to anybody that will come after me. Hopefully not many fucking more. But unless we tackle this idea of commercialization, they're going to take this to the nth fucking degree, and then it's going to cause a reactionary thing and go, well, oh my God, we have to stop this. And it's like, well, all we asked for was the small community of people that are persecuted, that are demonized and vilified, to have it ceased. You guys came along and went, what if we make everybody smoke weed? And do you know, that's a controversial point. I say that as somebody in this space and what I do, but I think everybody should have an opportunity to. Same with like DMT and other things. But I do not want to see fucking DMT sold on every street corner. I don't want to see Tesco value cannabis. Or I think there should be some forms of separation that allow for the gradual reintegration of things. So in the States, for example, they sell their bit like liquor, depending on most of the states, in separate shops. And I'm not saying that we should do the same in the UK, but then when we changed our licensing laws, the 24-hour licensing laws, and the cafe culture that we were promised, and this European sophistication that never really
Yeah.
that never materialized. We saw what that did. Then what? 10 years later, we had to ban those 3 litre bottles of cider. I used to enjoy Scrumpy Jacks when I was a teenager. It got you there. It got you. That's for sure. Jesus
Yeah.
Christ, it burnt when it came back up. But
Yeah.
the you can see how it's always a reaction, and they're having to then deal with their reaction because they're just not fucking listening to the lived experience of the people who are like, yeah, here's the majority of us. We took these drugs and nothing bad happened. And the
Yeah.
reason nothing bad happened to us is, yeah, they weren't contaminated. We were lucky enough that it wasn't a contaminated supply. Yeah, we were lucky enough that, we had people around us that were educated and aware. We were informed and knew how to use harm reduction techniques to ensure that we wouldn't end up in a difficult situation. And then on the other fucking side of the spectrum is the people who are continually harmed by this because they don't know how to play the wink wink game. Do you know what I mean? Going
Yeah.
into a nightclub that knows you're doing drugs, but do you know? And if you get jittery or whatever, the 10 people in front of you get in with their drugs, you act a bit odd, whatever they call the police, and you have this whole thing, and your life's fucking all of a sudden ruined. And it's
Yeah.
the same thing I see with again drug exceptionalism, the prescription pots and cannabis. Of this
Yeah.
idea that makes it magic and you're safe and you can go in and look at me, and then the other guy that doesn't have that protection, and it's we're missing the point. If it's correct that it can have benefit to people, then leave the fucking people alone.
Yeah, of
Don't run
course.
them through this racketeering system.
Yeah, and we've been benefiting from like these types. Like people have been benefiting from drugs for as long as society's existed. And like we've been, as a person who's used all types of drugs across all the spectrums of drugs. Like we now talk about this psychedelic renaissance. Like we talk about the potential for drugs like MDMA to provide therapy for people. I mean, we've been providing our own therapy for years. Like in the 90s, the 80s and the 90s, people were going out and getting high together, and having joyful times together, and providing that therapy with community built into it together, not sitting in a room somewhere, and being monitored while you do it. And it's exactly the same now with how we talk about certain drugs and how we provide that inverted commas treatment to people. We talk about, and I'd love to see more like pharmaceutical heroin or diamorphine, as we call it at Cranstoun, available for people right across the UK, to take away, the dangers of the illicit supply chain. The drugs that are coming in at the moment are much more dangerous than they ever were when I've been using heroin in the past. In terms of, the new synthetic opioids that are starting to show up. We've just seen the reports that there's been a 95% reduction in the opium supply and the opium currently being grown in Afghanistan, where most of our heroin comes from. So, there could be, the thinking is that there is some in reserve at the moment, but it could get less and less as we get into next year and about a year down the line. So the drug supply is going to become more tainted. These nitazenes that we're seeing just now are they're a synthetic opioid, but they're even stronger than fentanyl, which has been the driver of the overdose crisis in North America over the last 7 or 8 years. So what I'd like to see is much more pharmaceutical heroin, but the way that we talk about it right now is that it's a diamorphine assisted treatment. So the only way that it can be provided, and it's only in 2 locations in the UK at the moment, is that people who are injecting heroin every day, they come in and then they're supervised when they're injecting their twice a day to inject their pharmaceutical heroin. So what we're essentially saying is, okay, you're injecting heroin every day, but in order to get heroin that we know is clean, that we know is not fully adulterate, says we've got to supervise you doing it. It's like, I get that this is the only option at the moment because it's not available on a take home, but it's so frustrating. The people should be able to access this right across the UK without the
Yeah.
restraints.
Sorry, Can I ask though why it's not available? I mean, I'm trying to think what I saw the other day. I watch a lot of, or I have a lot of things on the background when I'm working. I think it was a Channel 4 documentaries. It's 60 Days On, three-parter about council estates. And there's a guy up in Glasgow, and he was talking about when he had his methadone, and he had this takeaway bottle, and he was showing at the camera, going, "This will kill me, you, her, ever." You know what I mean? And he said that why can I be safe to sort of use this? And then when he spoke of sort of later of like like feeling bad for using cannabis, and the shame when he had to admit, or he felt he had to admit, or frankly bravely admitted to the camera that yeah, he still uses street heroin. And then the reporter with him was like, then the justification of this is that you take this to not do these other things. Yet this isn't enough to sustain you to not do the other things. So
Yeah.
it's there's so many contradictions within that system, and like we again controversial. And I'm going to say this from my side, even though you're the expert and you know this. I'm saying this for, I guess, my audience that maybe suffer with cognitive dissonance about certain drugs and that kind of bias. Of
Mhm.
the diamorphine is a very clean drug.
Yeah.
It is a very very clean fucking drug on a
It's
reg
used,
on a regular
it's used,
dose.
yeah, in hospitals right across the country every day.
Yeah, and that it's the image that most people have is decades of propaganda perpetuated by continual governments because of this. I don't quite know. I've got a million multitude of ideas as to why it is, but they've perpetuated this narrative so that Christ, even I remember saying speaking to my own mother about this. She was quite an educated woman. She's quite well learned and experienced and very compassionate. And she kind of asked because she saw an uptake of like housing insecure individuals consuming drugs on her high street. And she was like, "So why do they look like this? Why this?" And had to
Yeah.
explain kind of that. Well, actually, when you don't have housing, this is a consequence. When this is something you take of this, and just what to us is entirely rational and understandable. In the same way, if a flood took away your house, you
Yeah.
have to then deal with all of your basic survivalist needs in a Maslowian kind of way on the hierarchy of needs. But people don't understand how drugs fit into that unless they've taken drugs. And even if they have, some of them, I hear it all the time. The people that I know that really struggled with cocaine, and the way they'll talk about, and I hate this fucking term, but I'm going to say it because it's the way they fucking say it, smack rats.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
And then the other side is them going, "You fucking crackheads, you this, you that," and it's like it is
Yeah.
the division they've sown between us that stops us compassionately coming together so that they can identify us as human. You
Of
know?
course, yeah, yeah, and I have that same experience. Like having been somebody who took a lot of different types of drugs, like powder form cocaine, MDMA, psychedelics, cannabis, in the early years. If you'd asked me like the day before I took heroin for the first time, if I'd ever took heroin, I'd been saying I'm never be one of those fucking junkies. Like that would have been how I would have reacted. And it's not to later on in life, and I've explored and I've read and I've thought about, drugs as a concept, as a whole, that, like I've realized that we do as a community need to come together. We need to really stop this drug exceptionalism. We need to band together that, you know, all drugs in their individual forms have social value for people, like and benefit, and some drugs can have medical value for people, like it's a real frustration in minds that that we've got that narrative specifically around heroin. It's always seen as this dirty, horrible drug, where in actual fact for so many people, it can be it could be a beneficial drug, because we don't in society right now. I don't believe that we have any sort of drug problems really. Including alcohol. Most dependency to any sort of substance, whether that be alcohol, heroin, cannabis, most dependent use of that, where it's causing any sorts of issues in your life, is linked to the social determinants that are around you. It's linked to your friendships, the community that you have around you, your housing situation, your financial situation. These are the sorts of things that ultimately to address, these sort of dependent use of substances, that we need to think about. And this is again where I think we are as a society, as a community, as as a treatment industry, we are behind other countries. I've visited services in multiple other countries. I've visited these overdose prevention sites, which are essentially, this is what got me to where I am. This is what got me the recognition that I have running one of these unsanctioned sites. This is what gets my name out there into the media and allows me and affords me the position that I have to talk in the press all the time. But ultimately, these are a sticking plaster on a bigger societal problem, these overdose prevention sites, and the underlying problem of the bigger problem of an actual safer supply of these substances that needs to be provided to people, rather than an emergency response of trying to stop people dying from illicit toxic drug supply. We should be supplying a clean supply to people who need it. So yeah, I mean it's frustrating, because in other countries, I was just saying that when people have got these like multiple forms of disadvantage that they present with to certain places where they're looking for support. They can, here in the UK, the first thing that a service provider or a treatment provider will normally go into and ask is, what types of drugs are you using? How many times a day are you using those drugs? In other countries, they're talking about, the first things that they're talking about is, your housing status, your if you are housed, are you surviving forms of violence in the household? How's your social circles? How's your relationships with your families and friends? How can we improve those situations? Because see, when you improve those situations, the drug use can often take care of itself. I've got this great booklet that I'll send to you. I don't know if you'll have seen it, but it's a booklet all about cannabis as a harm reduction tool. It was created by my partner's organisation, which is Mercenaries, which is a women's only project in Barcelona, and it's for women who use drugs surviving multiple forms of violence. And the participants of that, they're a cooperative, they're a community, they're not a service. Like most of the people who work there are participants or have been participants and are participants still of the cooperative and the community. They don't define themselves as a consumption space, but people can consume, the women who attend can consume any type of substance, whether that be smoking cannabis out the back in the patio, drinking alcohol out there, or injecting methamphetamines, heroin, or crack, or whatever in the small injecting area that they've got. But they don't define they're a community-based cooperative. And they created this tool, the participants created this booklet of cannabis. And before they printed it, they went out and they researched the academic research around it, and they checked it out to see if what they were saying matched with the research. And it's basically a booklet how cannabis can be a harm reduction tool in terms of, modifying or changing your relationship with other types of substances. And they do that with all types of substances, because this is what we need to do. Like women who are involved in sex work may, previously have been using a lot of crack cocaine, and crack cocaine or heroin, maybe heroin, in fact. Heroin's not probably the best drug if you're involved in sex work, because you don't want to be falling asleep and putting yourself in a situation where you could be prone to violence or rape. Where actually changing and using a little bit of methamphetamine would be a much better drug to use if you're involved in sex work, because you're awake and you're aware of the situation that you're in. And this is where we need to get to. We need to get to the point where we have a recognition and an understanding that certain drugs complement in certain situations in life. We talk about. Sorry, I'm banging on here. I'm banging on.
No, you really not. You're on point. You're very.
We talk about these like drug settings, and that's what's important. How are we taking these drugs? Where are we consuming these drugs? And who are we consuming them with? Like if I'm consuming psychedelics now, I want to be consuming psychedelics with people that I trust, people that care for me and I care for them. If I'm consuming MDMA, I want to test it by energy control in Spain. and I want to know that it's in a capsule, and if I'm consuming 100 milligrams or 120 milligrams, I don't want to be buying a pill off the street like in Manchester last week that contains that on average those pills contain 307 milligrams of MDMA, like, which was tested by Mandrake. Like, I don't want to. I could consume 307 milligrams of MDMA and live. Like, I'm a 6'3", not overweight, but slightly, maybe like a half a stone over the what should be the ideal weight. But I could consume that amount of drug, in one go, and I would live. I wouldn't kill me. It's not a lethal dose, but it's far more of a dose than I would want to consume in order to have a good time with friends. My ideal dose level for MDMA is about 150, with a reduction if I want to take more, maybe a few hours later, down to about 75, or maybe even 50, depending on what level of experience I'm having from the first dose. So this is where we need to be, like where we know. And yes, of course, there's good things in America about the dispensaries, and people know the exact level of THC and CBD that's in the cannabis there. But we need that for all. We need that for all drugs.
I think there needs to be a rational conversation of these things are not artificial binaries. More than one thing can be true, and more than one thing can be implemented to resolve these issues. So yes, there can be a commercial supply, but without an acceptance that there will be other supplies, especially with things like cannabis that can be chucked up and pulled down like 4 or 5 crops a year. Do you know what I mean? In a spare room. I mean, I'm not going to mention what I know about growing coca in the UK because that'll get me in serious trouble. But in terms of the timeframes of various things, it's an investment, but could be done in the long term. That's all I'm saying. But the same even like with poppies, with opium poppies, if people really want to, they can get access to whatever the fuck they want to. I mean, again, this podcast is going to get me in so much trouble on the various platforms that I put this out on, but I don't care. Hi for anybody actually that gets to hear this podcast. But the same way, like DMT can be extracted from numerous amounts of completely lawful substances. The precursors for innumerate drugs are available on websites that YouTube, I haven't linked, don't strike me again. They can easily get to their home, and then through a simple bit of chemistry, various things can be turned into other things. That will always happen. You will never be able to get rid of those precursors, because then somebody like China, which is actually a question I want to ask you, do you think China's commitment to the US to try to curb its production of fentanyl has led to this other branch of synthetic opioids that we're seeing?
You know what? I don't think so. I think, like you say, there's a precursor out there, and there's an ability for people to, make these types of synthetic opioids anywhere in the world now. We've just seen the bust of a big fentanyl. I don't know what you call it, a fentanyl factory or whatever in Canada recently. And I think we see things in Scotland, about the street benzodiazepines. At the beginning, with the street benzodiazepines, the idea was that these were coming in from Russia and China, but these benzos are now being made here in Scotland. Like, there's a market here. I don't think any international commitment will make any difference to the market and the disruption in the market. It's like when we talk about the war on drugs, we often talk about the last 52 years, because of the Misuse of Drugs Act being 52 years old and President Nixon's statement in 1971. But the war on drugs goes way, way back. We talk about the international treaties on drug trafficking in the 60s. Then we can even go back to, I think it was the 1914 article in the New York Times, about the most racist, sort of story that you'll ever see. Obviously, at that time, the fact that people from Black communities were living through, probably, like just everyday terrible living circumstances anyway in society in America, with racism. But then you had the headline about, you know, Negroes consuming cocaine. Like the article was talking about it making them bulletproof,
Oh, and this was the justification for higher caliber weapons. Yeah,
higher caliber
I
weapons.
remember
That's
reading
right.
that. Yeah,
Was,
Jesus,
yeah,
yeah.
the cocaine was making them bulletproof, and it was because of alcohol prohibition. So
Mm.
I think they I can't remember exact headline, but it was something along the, Negroes turned to sniffing cocaine due to not being able to get alcohol. And obviously, as I say, the article was about cocaine making people bulletproof, and a justification, like you say, for higher caliber weapons to be available. We've been the narrative's been there for a long time around this.
I
And
suppose it could even go back further to obviously British rule and divide with the Opium Wars. You know, we did under colonialism into China and in what was fully India, what we've now broken in Pakistan as well in the region. It's
yeah,
yeah, it goes back and it goes back, and the lessons haven't been learned, but it's almost that to and fro, isn't it? This pendulum of, oh, there enough acceptability of drugs because we're making all the money from them. Oh, drugs are not acceptable anymore. Get rid of all the drugs. Oh, there's too much money being made from drugs. We'll start making all the money from drugs again. Oh, drugs are not acceptable, and it's been
yeah, yeah.
swinging like that for like 400-500 fucking years.
Yeah, too long. And it has. It's been ongoing for a long time, and that's the like. If you ever get the chance, I can send you. Maybe I'll send you the video that my partner Aura Rook from Metzaneris talks about. Metzaneris, I was saying, is the Women's Only project. She talks about in one of her presentations about the plants, women use plants to control their own reproductive rights, and she goes back a long time with that presentation as well, like about women who would be the people who would control the medicines and the plants, and how that was pulled away from them and restricted
Mm-hmm.
by the elders in the communities and stuff like that. I mean, so yeah, we're talking about, like you say, a pendulum of back and forward and back and forward, and hopefully now we are reaching a point internationally, because there's good examples now in other countries where reform and changes, have not only stopped like mass amounts of people dying, and like reduce things like bloodborne virus transmissions, but are also saving those countries and those societies in terms of like the cost that's spent on this, which is completely unnecessary. Every year throwing um, you know, billions of pounds at this failed narrative that drugs are bad. Certain drugs are bad. Certain drugs are bad, because we've got the acceptable ones, and it's like tobacco as an example. I'm 7 days off of tobacco today,
Well
off
done.
cigarettes. Yeah. I'm really pleased about that. I'm obviously vaping, but I'm really pleased about that because I've done it through. I was at the Hit Hot Topics in Liverpool last week, and we went out to for a few drinks the night before, and also to the after conference event at the Caravan Club in Liverpool, and going out and socialising on the first couple of nights after just stopping smoking was good. But tobacco, like, it's the most incomprehensible drug. It's got no social value, it's got no redeeming qualities or features at all whatsoever. I mean, even for cannabis is not my thing. I'm not cannabis, like, it's not my drug, like.
Mm.
But even within that, I don't think tobacco has any like real redeeming qualities or features. Like, I think most cannabis users should be thinking about, why do you need tobacco to support your cannabis use? Cannabis can quite easily be consumed without tobacco, whether that be smoking just a cannabis joint, consuming cannabis via vaping, which is the direct cannabis right into the vape now,
Mm.
or through, edibles, etc. Like there's much healthier ways to consume your cannabis than mixing it with tobacco. Like
Yeah,
um,
it's just adding an element of potential dependency. I mean, if you look
mhm.
at, World Health Organization figures, for all the quite a somewhat controversial organization, I guess, in the past sort of few years, but they basically put tobacco above heroin when you look at the metadata in terms of likelihood of, I don't like the word addiction, likelihood of forming a dependency.
Yeah.
And then we look at, I've just wrote, there you go, preview, folks. I've just wrote about this for in the next issue of Weed World, talking about Juul and kind of the evolution of what again happened with capitalism, taking the idealists, alleged, I'm being generous here, the alleged idealists of the two gentlemen from Stanford University that started the company. Obviously, they kind of split and created packs, and packs have become quite a popular cannabis vaporizer. Initially, they were a herbal tobacco vaporizer, and they were kind of with their harm reduction ideas and wanting to take on big tobacco. And then they went on this huge journey of effectively creating a new market of people consuming a more dependent, likely dependency creating substance, um, than the cigarettes themselves that self titrate. A cigarette burns out. You smoke a couple of them, you start to feel sick because of the smoke and the other elements within them.
Yeah.
Whereas those little bars, especially once these guys created nicotine salts, effectively a new form of, it's like the cocaine to crack, but they cracked tobacco. There's a sentence, if you know what I mean. And then made it socially acceptable. They then ran it through, these Apple-esque style adverts, and have come out the other end being now owned by the same industry they sought to displace. And so effectively, they've been the best 10-year marketing campaign for nicotine and for the evolution of the tobacco companies to become, future proof. The same is true of, Shell, BP. These were oil companies. No, no, no. In the 21st century, we're energy producers. So now,
Yes.
fuck you guys. You can't rebrand like it's the same
Yeah. Yeah.
mechanisms
Yeah.
that are happening. And yeah, I think there is. Tobacco helps some neurodivergent individuals with concentration. There is a correlation of people with ADHD, and things like that, where they have a temporary increased focus. But I think then over a longer period of time, and I say this from my own experience when I was a tobacco consumer, consumed from like when did I start, like 8, 9, um, that it would be short bursts. But once I was so used to the substance, it was just a cyclical reduction in the what I would term for myself an increase in aggression at its absence. So it would just be
Yeah.
every 2 hours I need to fill it. Oh, I'm back down. Oh, I'm back down.
Oh,
Oh, I'm
oh,
back. And I'd long lost the concentration. I'd long lost the benefits of it. And I think that can be true of any drug that becomes too habitual, especially including pharmaceutical drugs. I think most
yes.
of these, the idea of them, they're torn between the capitalist imperative, the quarterly profits and more money, boys, got to keep the shareholders happy. And so they're then creating maintenance drugs for life, rather than this idea of actually, if we give them this short burst drug and they change lifestyle factors, maybe they move from a less polluting area, they move closer to nature, they start meditating, yoga. I know these are all hippie things, but change their diet, all these things that fundamentally, scientifically provably do impact our lives and our quality of life.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
they don't have the incentive to have that conversation. And I think when we then plug psychedelics into that, or cannabis, or diamorphine, or whatever else we plug into that, it has to be churned through that sausage machine. I don't know what you call a sausage machine, the thing that churns all the meat and pulls it out. And then what we get is what they will allow, and it is self-contained. And we are
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
unless we were there to put, as you say, to put the stuff in, we won't be represented. And so I think that's why
Yeah.
it's so important. Like people like yourself, again, as I said in the prelude before we started recording, I want to say finally, but I'm skeptical as hell, and I can't help but be because of the time I've spent in the space. I really hope they are listening, and what we've seen this year with Scotland's taking a stance as it's tried to for a few years now, and the UK government has obviously kind of said that. I think that what was the language? We won't stand in their way, something like that.
Yeah, specifically for the overdose prevention sites. I mean, I think more widely. I think the Scottish government. A few months ago, I actually attended this event. It was the Global Commission on Drug Policy, which is chaired by Helen Clark, the former Prime Minister in New Zealand. She's the chair now of the Global Commission on Drug Policy. People like Richard Branson are involved, and Ruth Dreyfus, the former president of Switzerland. So they had an event in Edinburgh, and the Scottish Drug Policy Minister, who's really new in post at the time, Eleanor Whittam. She made an announcement and held a press conference at that event where they came out with a new strategy, document strategy, and basically calling for full decriminalisation of all substances. And within that document, they were talking about looking at how regulation could work. Not that they asked for regulation of all substances, but how regulation could work, and to look further into that. But at the same time, decriminalise everything straight away. And this is kind of the political aspect of it again, but like you said, it is political, In Scotland, you've got the Conservatives saying that we've got de facto decriminalisation because the Lord Advocate, the senior law officer up here who controls policing and crime, said that people can be diverted from prosecution for any substances. Now, we don't have de facto decriminalisation. Last year in Scotland alone, over 22,000 arrests for possession of substances. Over in a country with a population size of 5 million people, or 5.5 million people, that's a lot of people being arrested for possession of substances. And although I back the calls for decriminalisation, of course, and as an organisation, and that's why I'm proud to work for the organisation that I work for, Cranstoun, as a frontline treatment delivery provider. We are the most vocal provider in the United Kingdom. We were the first provider to come out and publicly say, first provider providing frontline services to publicly say that the Misuse of Drugs Act's not fit for purpose. That yes, we should have full decriminalisation, that it's not going to support anybody with, it's not going to help anybody with dependency issues to punish them rather than support them. And also for the 90% of people who do consume substances where it's not problematic, it's not causing issues in their life, the most dangerous thing for them can actually often be the criminal contact, the criminal record, which can then lose them jobs, it can lose them standing in the community, friendships, relationships, etc., which can then actually, push people into more problematic use anyway. So, proud to work for that. But actually, my view and opinion is that while Scotland politically and publicly has this sort of persona of being, more liberal, more wanting to support and help people, what we're actually doing is we are the prime example of institutionalization and over medicalization of harm reduction. That's what we're doing. We're taking away the actual values of harm reduction, in terms of harm reduction being delivered by people who use drugs for people who use drugs. The values of harm reduction is you will be met exactly where you're at. We meet you where you're at. Harm reduction is radical love, and if we were talking about harm reduction as a concept now, it wouldn't be called harm reduction. It was about reducing harm when it first became available, but actually now what we're talking much more about, what I certainly advocate for, is more about individual rights. And when we over medicalize and we institutionalize these types of initiatives, what we end up with is a small overdose prevention centre in Glasgow, which is going to cost £2.3 million to run for 1 year. We end up with a diamorphine assisted treatment where 20 people have to come in and be monitored taking their diamorphine, that ends up costing over £2 million a year.
It's just a certain lack of understanding. To me, that is as obvious as the thing I keep bringing up, and I can see I've got a little audience in Germany, so hi guys. The 25 gram limit over there, they've not gone for an ounce, which is the social convention of the cannabis consumers. That's what we have regardless of metric or imperial. An ounce is your genuine, oh, I've got an ounce, you know what I mean? Obviously where it's legal, you're talking pounds or whatever, you guys are living higher dreams. But that's it's a misunderstanding. If that person feels shame, feels vulnerable at the systems that have betrayed them up until this point, are then paraded into an area where they've got to perform to get access to the thing that they take to allow them respite from this system, to then the moment they consume it be trapped within it. is it offensive. Frankly, it's insulting. It's fucking insulting. They go, we're helping them, and it is the epitome of like this white middle class savior complex of just like, oh, these people. And it's, no, you fuckers created this harm and continue to create it. You cannot fix it. Your removal will immediately start to better this situation. And then once you will look at us as humans and identify with this, because I take drugs. I like drugs. Drugs are drugs. And I openly, proudly stand on this platform for it, and will champion for the people whose voices can't be heard. I've wound my doctors up to the point my records have got everything reflected on it. I've got all my little notes. I've got everything. I went through different systems. I'm very public, and I do what I do. As I've said, to champion for those that if they spoke of it, they would lose their home. You know, if they spoke of it, they lose their job. If they get caught out in a drug fucking test, I've got nothing for the system to come and take. Do you know what I mean? We are in such a shit situation where I've got a champion for people across the place, not just me, others, yourself included, that the more we champion, the more we get indoctrinated almost into this system and removed from the experiences that ground us. And we need to bring those people up, but they're too not that on their journey enough. They're problematic, you know, they're not stable yet. Maybe when they're stable, we'll listen. No, fuck that. They're the people whose voices need to be heard loudest because they're the ones whose experiences are most recent. For all that's not to lessen yours, mine, Fiona's, anybody else I can think of that works in this fucking space that champions as hard as they do. But it is to recognize that there is no fucking difference. There is no fucking difference. It's the same as you going, oh, well, arbitrarily, we don't like people who eat seafood. And so therefore, we're not going to listen to people who live near the coast and people who are involved in that industry. That's, to me, again, as arbitrary it is, because again, we've unpinned all of their propaganda. We've used science, decades of academic facts, of observational studies, of information around the world that correlates regardless of culture or language or region. Prohibition doesn't and cannot work. It will only ever worsen the lives of the vast majority of consumers. In fact, I would go as far as saying all consumers, because no matter how comfortable my little pot makes me, every time I hear a fucking siren or see a blue light, I'm still paranoid. I'm still scared what's in my pockets. Even with that pot of protection, I still worry about how I smell. Even as loud and as vocal and who I am and what I do in this space, I still worry every fucking day about my plants, about my life, about my day to day as a consequence of the looming fear that they create to keep me safe from myself. Come on. When you break it down like this, it's psychopathic.
It's crazy. It is. It's crazy. Yeah. I mean, the only thing, like, you've covered all of that there. I mean, the only thing that prohibition does is make it less safe for everybody, less safe, more worrying for every person involved in it. You know, for me, you know, like, as I say, I love working for the organisation that I work for because we're doing things that have never been done. I think we're trying, you know, to put ourselves out in the space, and we're trying to, you know, do what we can within the current situation while still asking for more and bigger changes to happen, and not restricting people like me. Because when I first started working for Cranstoun, you know, I was worried about how my voice would carry in the sector, you know, in terms of you know, being really, really upfront about, you know, the need for prohibition to stop. You know, like the prohibition is the most dangerous thing about you know, drug use, and because this is unusual, you know, and this area, all these services are commissioned with these contracts. You know, nobody wants to really speak up and be vocal about, you know, the failed war on drugs or war on people, you know, for fear of potentially losing the next contract or not being considered for the next contract. But you know, like, what we're doing is we're trying to, you know, provide these overdose prevention sites. So we're trying to provide diamorphine to people, but I've already said, you know, like, these facilities are a stopgap. These types of, like, assisted treatments are a stopgap. You know, we need to get to a point where, as a society, we just don't have the prohibition, because it's the prohibition ultimately that is the issue. You know, like,
100%.
you've kind of covered it there. You know, like, that's the biggest part of what I talk about regularly. You know, that actually drug use in itself is not inherently dangerous, but prohibition is inherently dangerous.
100%. And then I'd say ill-informed or I hate the word misinformation because of the way it's been co-opted by our current masters, as it were. But misinformation around drugs. So obviously, I think there's been a couple of ecstasy deaths in this country through effectively sodium poisoning, through the young people that consume too much water because of myths and narratives that were put out, because of, again, that lack of education, which loops back to it being the consequence of prohibition. One thing I am curious about, and for all, yeah, we do have some projects here and there kicking around. Do Cranston, or is there any sort of moves to then go, okay, if we're going to allow the safe supply on one side, surely it's sensible, even just from an observational study point of view, to do testing, find out what is on the street, what people are consuming, and even just as we know for a fact, I call it like the shandy absinthe paradigm. That if it's not so much a problem with weed, you know, you get a 5-10% THC one week, and you're like, yeah, so, and the next week it's a 25, whatever. The consequence of that is not that problematic. Cannabis, no matter how much you consume, and believe me, I have fucking tried, it will not shut down your respiratory system. It'll fuck you up for days, and your metabolism will slow to a point where it'll take you days to process it, and you will be high for days and days. But you will eventually come back from that, and there will be no long-term consequences, as far as my understanding of the science and my own vast experience would tell me. But something like, you get heroin that's, say, just over a shandy for a few weeks, and you have a tolerance to that. And then the next week you get something closer to an absinthe. The overdose risk that is there, the consequence of the not knowing, is a massive fucking problem. But even just talking to, say, Gary in prison last weekend, he was telling us about a new marketing that they're doing at the other prison that he just left. And what they're doing is they're finding that the vulnerable people that consume a lot of spice, synthetic cannabinoids, and they're getting them to now consume liquid soaked, like paper soaked in fentanyl. And so they're consuming them either through like boiled kettles, or they're ripping and burning them if they've got access to lighters, or using the vapes because they've got prison issue vapes, they can put them in there. And it's knocking them for shit. And so obviously when that guy, they have a code blue and they have to come in and deal with the overdose, that sells the product to the other prisoners going, oh my God, that's the shit. That must be good. And it's
I completely agree. You know, like there is certain substances where, you know, you can consume to extremely high levels, and there can be vast differences in the quantity in terms of the, you know, the active ingredient within that, and it's not going to kill you. But then there is certain substances out there where, you know, like just a slight variation in the substances can be obviously fatal in terms of overdose, or other stuff, like, you know, in terms of like the psychological impact of those substances as well. And again, you know, I'm all for drug checking services. You know, like, of course I am. You know, like Cranston, we are, as an organisation, you know, trying to move forward with, you know, diversion from prosecution, because, you know, obviously decriminalisation is not in place. So if at least if we can divert people when they don't get a criminal record in the meantime, great. You know, things like drug checking, overdose prevention sites, diamorphine treatments, we're moving forward with that. And we're massive advocates, and I am personally, of drug checking services. You know, this is what sort of keeps the market safe in other countries. You know, if you look at Catalonia, Spain, you know, like, obviously, you know, possession of any type of substance is not illegal there. You know, like, drugs are not illegal. And what keeps the market safe is drug checking services, you know, energy control, you know, making sure the organisation over there that do the drug checking services. And I'm all for that. We can't have that right now in the UK readily, because it has to come with a Home Office licence agreement, you know, in terms of where the Home Office is in the UK government at the moment. You know, again, you know, we're not looking at regulation or drug checking to a great extent. We're talking about further criminalisation and punishment of people when it comes to, you know, the UK government and also the opposition, UK Labour at the moment. The rhetoric over the last couple of years has been, you know, about absolutely naming and shaming people who use drugs. You know, like Keir Starmer's stance on things like cannabis has been disgraceful. You know, so there's not big shifts there, but drug checking at least can regulate to a certain extent the unregulated market. You know, if you go into overdose prevention sites or drug consumption rooms in certain countries like Copenhagen, I visited a couple of times over there, and they've got on-site drug checking spectrometers where they can, you know, test the substance, and they can at least know if there was like a synthetic opioid inside the heroin, which is obviously, you know, these synthetic opioids can be 50 to 100 times stronger than heroin, you know, can be instantly fatal to somebody who's just been consuming heroin. And then all of a sudden you mix this synthetic opioid in, and that can just kill somebody instantly. So, of course, I support and I advocate for these drug checking to try and regulate an unregulated market. But like everything else, for me, the bigger picture, you know, like as an individual, is overdose prevention site or drug consumption rooms, the assisted part of diamorphine treatment and the drug checking services are all just sticking plasters on the bigger issue of prohibition. You know, the bigger issue of, if we regulate these markets, we don't need drug checking services. You know, if the market's already regulated.
Well, I mean, it's. I agree to a certain degree. The vast majority of would, but if we look at anything, this government, we love to put tax on things. So I'm not going to name and shame anybody, but I could probably throw a rock from here and hit two houses selling cigarettes that come in from abroad.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I used to live in a part briefly in a place called, what am I going to name the place? Actually, just name in Washington in the Northeast, where there were several illicit alcohol houses, which were dodgy vodkas, to a point of like one of the houses, the guy got prosecuted because somebody had permanent blindness because of the ingredients that was used. It was just, but wherever there is too much of a cost restriction, or there is then a restriction because of timing of access or whatever else, there will always be that hole in the market. And I think so that those services will always need to exist, but I agree they should have always be the first step. But I think with testing, if we could do mass testing and an amnesty, and basically get every drug user in the country, and there's a lot of you fuckers out there, well, you know what I mean, got to be out and proud at some point, but I understand why you're not right now. But if we get a sample from everybody that does something in an honest kind of reflection of their drug use experience, and anonymized in a way, that data set would tackle the propaganda that we live under. We don't have a clue what the drug consuming public looks like. You know what I mean? Even me, I still have to lie, and look how public I am being. I still cannot be honest because of the potential consequences of certain things. You know, it's the guy go to the doctor, and the doctor goes, you know, how many units of alcohol do you drink? And he goes, oh, doctor, you know, just 6 units a week. And the doc's like, haha, me too. We're corrupting all of this fucking data, as you're saying before, the medicalization of cannabis through these private prescription systems. The data that they are creating is bastardized, because I've had in-person conversations. I'm not going to name you, don't worry, with one of the heads of one of the groups, the biggest party in the UK importing and distributing cannabis, that they know that 90% of their consumers are combusting.
Yeah.
You know, that, how do you then go, oh, well, all these people, these 32,000 people are vaporizing? Well, no, behind closed doors, you know that they're doing this. So then you can't say that the smoking of cannabis is bad, but using our £400 vaporizer is. Again, it's that classist line that is then drawn there, where science and rationale and logic would destroy it. But they put it up based on this con of authoritarian, I don't say authoritarianism, but a presentation of an authoritative figure. No, we're better educated. Here's the experts. These are the consultants. These are the industry, and they know better than you, little people, and they'll figure it out for you, and you just be happy with whatever they give you.
Yeah. I you know, and I agree, you know, there's always going to be some sort of underground market for stuff, you know, like, but when we look at the underground markets now in terms of, you know, like the tobacco underground market, you know, primarily most of the underground tobacco market in the UK is still regulated tobacco. You know, it's just tobacco that's tax-free, because, you know, we tax everything so much. And that's what I get in terms of, what you're saying. If we were to have a regulated market here, in terms of regulation, which goes down a commercialized route, we could end up with taxation, things becoming really expensive. And then that could create quite a widespread underground market where, substances are really toxic in that underground market because people simply can't afford to go to the regulated market. So it's really important in terms of how we do regulate substances when we eventually get to that point, when that pendulum swings far enough for society as a whole. And I think society is starting to understand more and become much more aware that the war on drugs is just a failed political narrative to prosecute and criminalise and persecute certain communities, which is more widespread now. And those communities are more widespread because more people are recognising, the social and holistic value of consuming certain substances in different areas. So of course, I get that, and the more testing, the more drug testing. One of my hashtags is test drugs, not people. Because that's kind of where we're at as a society. Somebody's on a methadone prescription. They're getting tested to see if they've got any unregulated opiates inside their system, and then we've persecuted these people by removing their methadone prescription, which we know. Like any independent or academic study out there will tell you that the key protective factor against an opiate overdose is for somebody to be in methadone prescribing, in terms of having, whether they're using other opiates on top or not. There's still more in Scotland, more than 3 times less likely to die from an opiate-based overdose if you're on a methadone program. So of course I get all that. More testing of drugs, the better. But in my opinion, like although we want that data and we need that data and we need to know what's in the unregulated market, having the regulated market would actually take it, if it's regulated in the right way and not through this massive commercialization, would take away most of the risks anyway.
I think that's my fear. For all, spoiler alert, I come to quite an optimistic conclusion in my latest article that'll be out in Weed World in the next issue. I still think that capitalism, if we allowed all drugs just suddenly commercially available, then all right, we're going to regulate and allow sale and consumption, that there'll be a tipping point where, we'll get rid of the old problems, and then the capitalism inevitably will create new ones by cutting corners and going, well, actually, if we use this precursor instead of that one, we'll save 500,000 a year. If we do this instead of this, if we do this, I can't help but feel that unless we can solidify that point in the pendulum in the middle and take a screenshot of it, a snapshot of it. God, that shows the difference in language, doesn't it? Screenshot, snapshot. As in generation. Sorry, my brain just went off on one there. That if we could capture that and go, well, actually, this is what it is. So what is it? We need to then, the first line, listen to the people that currently use drugs. What do they need? Not what we're willing to give them. Not what we think politically will be tolerable. What the papers will let us get away with. No, fuck any of that. What do you need today? And I can tell you now that the majority of the things they need today are the same things that every fucker else needs. It's again, to go back to Maslow, we are quite easy creatures to get the base requirements. You know what I mean? You make us cold, we freeze. You make us wet, we fucking might die. Do you know what I mean? You starve us, we die. Get the basic right. And then, like you say, anything that arises post that is not then a social, economic, environmental stimuli. It is then a trauma. It is then a something else. If it's then becoming would be judged at that point a problematic consumption. But 9 times out of 10, if you were to then understand the triggers for that individual as to why it's manifesting or appearing optically from the outside as problematic, to that person on the inside, they may be doing the best they've ever done. They may be feeling such fucking relief. And I think this with my troubles, I say troubles, what was identified by others as my troubles with amphetamine when I was younger. And then now they've diagnosed me with ADHD, and they're refusing to give me stimulant-based drugs because I used to take a stimulant that obviously was treating my undiagnosed ADHD. We're in
Yeah.
wonderful little loops here of just that they can't seem to, they pathologize our medicinal consumption, and then they keep their safeguarded medical consumption, and there's a strict parameters, and it's for single use and and it's they're not capable. They're almost not capable of merging these things together.
Yeah.
It's not.
It's that exactly, and that's why sometimes where like I sometimes, although I think that we should have a fully regulated market, my main concern is the capitalism, the commercialization and capitalism of a fully regulated market. So sometimes I think, actually, do we want to sit in that sort of stopgap period where drug use is just not illegal, and we have access to drug checking services to still just regulate the illicit market, but it's not illegal for consumers, so ultimately, the distributors are still the people at main risk at that point, but the distributors have been willing to take the risk for the last 50 odd years for us, for consumers.
Yeah, I mean, what I would love to see from that, again, my ideal bit utopian in it is that it would create almost like from Spain, the cannabis clubs organically arose from effectively certain judiciary decisions on discretionary production of 2 plants per individual in a certain amount of possession. And then they went, wait, one of us allowed that, 10 of us, 20, 100, we're allowed XYZ. That's the collective. And so through mechanisms like that, people could then become the suppliers, the producers, and it be through it's again. I don't.
You're talking about utopia here, right?
Again, yeah, but again, for me, it's trying to avoid the we don't want to unnaturally bring in consumers of drugs. We don't want to create like the new consumers. So again, like the dual argument of that they created a whole new generation of teenagers that frankly wouldn't have smoked cigarettes. They wouldn't have been exposed to nicotine, but because of the cool little USB thing that they can hide and get away with, and it's hyper normalization and all the other points that I make in this bloody article that I've written. That if we can avoid that mechanism, but still at the same time normalize and protect and start to understand what drug cultures are. I don't just mean the way that they manifest under prohibition, but I mean, frankly, there's not. I'm never going to arrive at a point of stabilizing, air quotes, huge air quotes, stabilizing my life, or at a point of healing or whatever, that I'm not ever going to be enticed by the idea of, some wicked drum and bass and some MDMA. Do you know what I mean? That's still always, I'll then plan for it the older I get, the more I'll think about it, going, oh, that come down might be a bitch, I need what I need. I'm not as youthful as I was before, sort of thing. But that's what I'm basically trying to say is that once we've dealt with the pathologized parts of it, we have to accept that some people just like to take fucking drugs. As Carl Hart argues about, his heroin use, and I think quite eloquently, is that if it's not having a negative impact, then it's fucking fine. There's a billion things you do a day that are far more detrimental. If you live in a big city, the amount of pollution you're breathing into your fucking lungs every day. If you eat McDonald's or drink fucking Coca-Cola or do you know what I mean? There's so many other things that are so hyper normalized in society that are killing us en masse, but the system doesn't even have those conversations with us.
Yeah, and it's those, like we've just had this narrative constantly bounced at us for years now, like especially around certain types of drugs, like these are a car crash. Every single person that takes them is, a car crash, and they're going to ruin your life, and that's just the narrative. And if you have that narrative thrown at you, along with, this just saying no, this just like, Thatcher, Reagan, like drug use is bad narrative, like it's perpetrating, that we think that, as drug users, when we consume these substances, that, we're doing something that's wrong, that we're doing something that's bad. And that's still the narrative that we're giving to younger people now who are just starting out on their, journeys of consuming certain substances. And I get the same as what you were saying there, like in terms of, as a person who uses drugs, like right now, if I want to use any drugs in the United Kingdom, I'm really scared to use drugs in the United Kingdom. I'm not a cannabis consumer, as I've said, like cannabis is one of the few substances that's unregulated, that can be used without any real sort of potential overdose risks. Obviously you can overdose and make yourself extremely high, but overdose in terms of like fatal overdose, substances like benzodiazepines, MDMA, anything that comes in pill format. We know that synthetic opioids are being found in all these types of drugs now. Our only real drug checking services at the moment is Wedanos in Wales, where you can send the substances in and they can be tested, and the results are published online. Just for October there, they published a bunch of results for things that have been sold as benzodiazepine pills, and they've all got synthetic opioids in them. So the message right now is like for everybody who's consuming any type of substances to start low and go slow. We spoke about the MDMA pill with 307 milligrams of MDMA in it. Like test a little bit of the substance first. Give yourself plenty of time for those effects to materialize. For the effects of the substances. Don't redose them for an excessive amount of time that maybe you would redose. Like I've had that experience when I was younger. Taking what was then referred to as ecstasy pills, taking ecstasy pills, and then half an hour into it, like you're not feeling anything, so you take the other half, and then then 30 minutes later you're like completely out your nut, like because you're coming up from both at the same time. But give yourself that time, and make sure that you're being safe out there at the moment, because the drug market is now at the most dangerous it's ever been in my 47 years from yesterday. I was only 47 yesterday, so from my 47 years on this planet, and the majority of my life being a consumer of one type of illicit drug, because I've consumed every type of drug, but being a consumer, this is the most dangerous period that we've ever been in the United Kingdom. And it's going to get worse. It's going to get more dangerous before it gets any better, because I don't think we're at a point where we're going to see lots of drug checking services. We're going to see, access to a safer supply, or for people who are, unhoused and injecting drugs in public. We're not going to see access to things like consumption sites readily available for quite some time to come.
Yeah, I think unfortunately you are quite right there. I've got a few sort of maybe shorter questions, maybe quite somewhat political. I just want to, I guess, for my own edification, but also for the audience to sort of learn. I want to hear a bit more about what's sort of happening with Scotland. So, is naloxone being sort of pushed since there's been obviously this more progressive thing this year? Is it becoming more widely available?
Yeah, and I suppose that's one of the worrying things, that naloxone, in terms of naloxone. I'm sure most of your listeners will know, but just a quick explanation. Naloxone is an opiate reversal. Anybody can carry it in the UK. It's quite simple to administer, and it's not detrimental in any way. If you were to see somebody out in the street, as an example, and it wasn't an opiate-based overdose or heroin or opiate-based overdose, and you administer it, it wouldn't do any harm or any damage to anybody. So yeah, I suppose the worrying aspect is Scotland has a drug death rate that is high as North America, like Canada and America. We've not seen the influx of the really strong synthetic opioids. And despite the fact that Scotland has probably one of the most comprehensive naloxone distribution packages in the world, we've still got that one of the highest overdose rates in the world. Not that I want police involved in any way, shape, or form in any area, especially not in harm reduction. Like I've said already, the institutionalisation and medicalisation of harm reduction, I think, lessens the value of harm reduction. But often police are the first responders when they're caught, when somebody calls emergency services if there's been a suspected overdose, and every single police officer in Scotland now carries naloxone. It's easily distributable and pick up, and you can pick it up from pharmacies. It doesn't cost anything. You can even go online in Scotland and do a simple training and a click and deliver, and you can have naloxone delivered to your house. The ambulance service in Scotland, if they respond and they revive somebody from an overdose, they can distribute naloxone to family and friends and the people around them that have called for the overdose. So, yeah, great comprehensive naloxone package. Of course, naloxone is amazing. The more people that have it, the better. And of course, our drug death rates would be so much higher if we didn't have such a comprehensive naloxone package. So it's saved so many people. But it is also a concern that despite that, we've still got these extremely high death rates.
Yeah, to sort of put it on into perspective for people, I made a quick note of them, and I think actually the reduction that we've seen for all is still astronomically high. The deaths for last year were 1,051 in 2022 in Scotland, down 21% from 2021. I haven't noted what that was, but my smart listeners can do the math out there. Is
1,339 it was the year before.
Yeah, and that's, I think was it 2017 was the high, like the peak, and there's been a slight gradual reduction sort of since 2017. Is that related to these sorts of programs?
Well, no, the peak was 2021. That was the highest on record at 1,339. The 2022 figures were the lowest since 2017.
Ah, right, yeah. Sorry, I must have misread the document as I was preparing earlier. Thank you for clarifying. So, what do you think that's attributable to?
Well, I think last year's figures, I mean, like when we look at the years over since 2017, 2018, there was a 27% rise in drug-related deaths. That's the highest percentage rise in a single year since the statistics began. And it's been like, although you've had little like increases, and then last year, obviously 21% is quite a significant decrease. Actually, I think the 2020, 2020 and 2021 figures, there was definitely impacts from COVID around that. Like obviously a lot of the services weren't accessible to the same, pre-COVID levels. The services had to adapt. Some of them had to close, etc. Like people, um, some people, I'm a massive advocate for people to be given methadone on a take-home basis, not to have to stand in a big line in a pharmacy and consume their methadone on site, the same as I was talking about the diamorphine. While I am advocating every day for diamorphine assisted treatment, I think that's the first step, and then we should be advocating for take-home diamorphine, so people can consume at their own pace, at their own leisure, in their own environments. But however, there will still always be people who are, at risk if you give excessive amounts of substances to. And there was impacts during COVID by people who potentially maybe weren't at that point where, they had the ability to consume in a way that was, not dangerous, were given excessive amounts of methadone. So we've seen some increases due to that. So, there's obviously been initiatives. The Scottish Government invested an extra £250 million and on top of the existing budget in 2021. That's £50 million extra each financial year for the lifetime, the 5 years of the Scottish Parliament. So there's been obviously impacts from that investment. There's obviously been the things around the police carrying naloxone. There's been a move to get people into treatment. If people are in treatment, like we've spoke about it, if people are on methadone, that's the key protective factor. And there's been moves to, sort of rearrange the system, because previously people were punished if they used on top of their methadone. I think we're starting to see a change on top of that, on a change in that area now. So people are not it's not punitive, and people are not kicked off the methadone straight away if they test positive for a urine sample for heroin, street heroin. So yeah, of course, there's things had an impact, but what we've seen is the first half of 2023, the Police Scotland have suspected drug death figures, and they're usually quite accurate. They're not, they're usually reasonably accurate, and we've seen an increase for the first half of 2023 again. So I think we're at a point where, with the current substances in Scotland, deaths have plateaued, and they're not going to decrease or increase massively until we see synthetic opioids on a larger scale, and then that will be when deaths will increase drastically. And I am particularly concerned and worried about those synthetics, given how high our drug death rates already are. And I think ultimately, if we don't change, if we don't sort out this, because Scotland is particularly bad for it, for the institutionalisation and medicalisation of services. And if we don't change that, we don't stop spending far too much money on delivering things that are really easy and can be delivered in a really cost-effective and cheap way, we're not going to see much change. And the only thing that could actually stop our drug deaths or reduce our drug deaths is that there'll just be nobody fucking left to die, man.
That is a unbelievable truth, but it is nevertheless true, and it leads on, I guess, to my next question, which is, which I guess then leads on to the next question about kind of the reasons and consequences of this. If there is this awareness, if there is, because it's not just us, it's many people in many spaces, not just in the UK but around the world. But just to stick with the UK for a minute, I mean, Suella Braverman, obviously, thankfully now our former Home Secretary, obviously being replaced by
James Cleverly.
Who the fuck is it?
James Cleverly.
That Cleverly, hey, there you go. Yeah, because obviously he switched from Foreign Secretary because somehow they fucking pulled a switch and got David Cameron back.
It's mental, isn't it?
But my point is that she made comments obviously about homelessness as a lifestyle and wanted the eradication of tents. And I've always had the suspicion that they keep homeless services or disadvantaged services just enough that they can keep almost a line to point at and go, we'll make you that if you don't play the game. And it's a self-justification for the drug war of going, all these people are here because they use drugs. And so do you know what I mean? It's this double-edged sword that they can just swing it in a battle, and it's so hard to combat their narrative. And now we're seeing it manifest in a campaign of dehumanization.
Yeah, I think obviously I seen the comments from Suella Braverman. I think it was pre-record that before we started recording. We spoke about the amount of people that have held that Home Secretary office in the last 5-7 years. You couldn't name it. Back after Priti Patel, you had Priti Patel. I think at the time, I don't think anybody thought it could get any worse than Priti Patel, and the rhetoric and the stigmatization, not just for people who use drugs, but in terms of people who are trying to flee often situations of war and extreme climate change, etc. Like people who are trying to seek a better life in another part of the world. And the stigmatization that those people get, in terms of putting them all in a barge, like a floating prison. This constant narrative about stop the boats and stuff like that, So yeah, we didn't think it could get any worse, and all of a sudden we've got Suella Braverman, who's just like the most stigmatizing statements that you could ever imagine, talking about fining charities for giving people who are unhoused and sleeping on the streets a tent, to just try and keep them warm, even within that, like a tent doesn't have a toilet, people have nowhere to go to actually just have a pee, or, like basic thing like brush your teeth or have a wash, like, but you want to give them a little bit of heat, and then you're going to find a charity, and it is that stigmatization. It's that narrative that comes from government, that connects people who are unhoused and homeless, often with drug use, that then stigmatizes drug use even further. And it's just about it's not just about plunging the knife in, it's about trying to turn the knife, like, but they're not succeeding anymore. I don't think they're succeeding. I think that narrative, is becoming less and less acceptable to society as a whole, because people are recognizing it's not about drugs, it's not about the drug use, it's not about the alcohol, it's not about the alcohol use, it's about the social aspects of the society that we live in, So I'm glad that she's gone, but do I think the next one is going to be any better? I really don't know. Like, again, I don't know if we talked about this pre-record, but I don't see it getting any better. Certainly not before the next election, because the rhetoric is out there. It's all about being tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime. And drug use, unfortunately, still is seen as a crime.
Well, as you said, it's the optics. Something you've touched on as we've gone that we haven't really spoken of directly is obviously I suppose it hasn't. It's been signed, but it doesn't go active. I think it's next April it goes active, something like that. The nitrous oxide ban. It's some point next year that it's actually the power will be enforceable. But it's gone through its mechanism of ascent, I believe, at this point. So it is effectively unstoppable, but it's not yet, I believe, enforceable. But that has come from the optics of TikTok, Instagram Reels, whatever else, of people taking balloons while driving. Quite often, not to demonize the youth. I was young once. I know what it was like, but we were lucky enough to not have so many fucking cameras running around taking balloons in public and whatever else. And again, the optics of it, and again, a small percentage, not to diminish anyone that has died from it, and people do die from it. There can be an issue of effectively like a bubble that that goes into then your bloodstream, and it can then cause a problem, to a minute number of people that consume it. And so they're using these sorts of justifications of the optics of it and this potential lethality of it, as a mechanism to go, well, we have to control this. Obviously, they've put it in at the softest measure, as you say, Class C. But one of the things, and this is mainly my question to you, is that was championed by my former head of police force in Durham Constabulary, Joe Farrell. She recently announced a few, I don't know, weeks ago, or a month maybe past, that she's taken or she will take up the new head of police for Scotland. So I was just wondering what you personally thought of that, extension to the nitrous ban, but also the implications potentially on the progress that is being made north of the border. I say north of the border because obviously I'm in sunny old Durham.
Yeah. You know what? So did you say that Joe Farrell, the former CC Chief Constable in Durham, actually championed the banning of nitrous oxide?
Oh yeah, did I not mention that in that? But yeah, that was supposed to be my connector. I think I missed out the connector point. Yeah, exactly. She was the one that championed it. Same with the new funding for antisocial behaviour based on the association of drug use.
Right. Okay. I have not, like, it's something that I've kind of been meaning to look into, because obviously I'm aware that the CC Livingston, the former Chief Constable of Scotland, has stepped down. There's been some big changes in Scotland. There was Assistant Chief Constable Gary Ritchie, which was he was responsible for, the drugs, in terms of the harm reduction and drugs response. And obviously Joe Farrell coming in as the new Chief Constable of Police Scotland. I seen it the other day on Twitter, or X, formerly known as Twitter. That the three female leads in Scotland now. So you've got the Lord Advocate, Dorothy Bain QC, the Director General, which is essentially like the next in charge of the policing and crime, as a female, and then obviously Joe Farrell coming in as the female lead of Chief Constable of Police Scotland. I didn't know, I don't, and I've not looked into much around previous things that Joe Farrell's championed. But I mean, obviously for if that's the case, and she's championed things like moving nitrous oxide into a more into a banned substance, and some stuff that she's personally advocated for. That doesn't fill me with hope. But at the same time, I think where we are in Scotland, I don't think there's going to be um, much arguments in terms of further criminalisation of drugs as a whole. Like the government and the ministerial office of the Lord Advocate. So, because the Lord Advocate, it's a kind of funny situation. The Lord Advocate is the senior law officer, and policing and crime is fully devolved to the Scottish Parliament. Has already talked about diversion for all classifications of substances, but we cannot decriminalise because the Misuse of Drugs Act is not devolved to the Scottish Parliament. That's still a UK Westminster controlled act of law. But health's fully devolved, policing and crime's fully devolved. And this is actually, I suppose, it's not answering your question. I would have concerns about Joe Farrell if that's our previous sort of stance around stuff. But this is something that we've not spoken about, which has just came up for me, and it's something I think is really important. Like in the UK, the rest of the UK, drugs are still in the criminal justice area, where in Scotland they're not. They're in health. Drugs policy sits in health. Now, first up, everybody would think, okay, that's great. It's not a criminal issue; it's a health issue. But in actual fact, it can be, in my opinion, and this is purely based on my own opinion here, like pitching drugs as a health problem can be as much as an issue as pitching drugs as a criminal justice issue, because for most people who use drugs, it's not a health issue. For the majority of people who use drugs, it's not a health issue. Actually, the health issue is when you remove the drugs from them. Because it's the drugs that actually create the social environment and the health around them. So I think we need to be very careful, and that's a political stance. That's a political choice being made by the Scottish government to say drugs is not a criminal issue; it's a health issue, which then stigmatises drugs again. Because everybody that takes drugs, it's a health issue and they need treatment. It's just not the case. Most people don't need any form of treatment.
Yeah, and I think it plays perfectly into this pipeline of, pay £6,000 and you can have a ketamine infusions. But if we catch you at ketamine with a festival, we're going to go extra hard on you. You know what I mean? I did Boomtown for like 7 years in a row. Back when it was cool. I say that as jokingly. I haven't been in many years. Back when it was smaller. Once it got too large, social anxiety, can't deal with that size of group, no matter what drugs I'm on. But the evolution of kind of the drug consuming public in this country has always been kind of reactive to policy. And I think that, again, we have to recognize that hedonistic, egoic, just drug use, that's a lot of people. That is, whether you like it or not, that is a lot of fucking people. And there are certain people that may be more susceptible to certain things, but these are not the substances. We have to remember the substances are neutral articles. We can plot what they should do in vitro in an average environment, etc., work out the median response, blah, blah, blah. But there will always be extremes of the bell curve. And we can't pathologize that and then create all of that solution. It's the same with alcohol. We have a basic idea and structure of it. And, technically the Licensing Act says it's unlawful to serve somebody who is intoxicated on alcohol. Yet they do it to a certain level. They get to judge it based on it, and then you can cut somebody off. That's not a health issue. For all the consequences of consuming alcohol, then in majority are a health issue if you then actually look at the statistics and whatever else. But there's a spectrum, is what I'm saying, is that drugs need to fall onto that same spectrum. It can't be like too much alcohol, that is a criminal issue. But you being pissed on a high street, generally, you will get some form of discretion for being a dick. Like you put a cone on your head, or you're drunkenly having a piss. Yes, you've committed a public order offence, but there will be more of an understanding towards that based on the environment and everything else. That's not your problematic. We need to pathologize you, remove you from your life, and almost it's like the double slit experiment in like quantum physics of like, it's the observation of it then changes it. Whereas
Yeah,
if
yeah,
it was just an aberration of drug consumption one night, they wanted to take this drug at this festival, they wanted to do whatever, they may never take that thing again. But as you said, the environment in which they take it, the responses to it, etc. I think that's why music festivals continue to thrive no matter how much they try and charge people for the fucking tickets. Is it's a guaranteed space that you're okay to do that. As long as you can sneak your drugs in and you're subtle with it and whatever else, you can all play the game and be like, oh, the utopia if we all get to take drugs and nobody's judging each other.
yeah, yeah,
And so
yeah.
that
Totally.
needs to be adopted rather than, again, that's the same to me as the wink wink doctor about the units of alcohol you're drinking or the not smoking your prescription cannabis. It's painful to me because it's all lies and half truths. I want to be fucking honest.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I get it. I agree. I completely agree. And it's like the health thing is a really big one for me. You know, I speak about it often because what we're doing there is we're just making it okay for the Scottish government to continue to over medicalise everything. Because when it's a health issue, then it all sits in the NHS. You know, the prescribing services all sit in the NHS up here in Scotland. The diamorphine treatment sits in the NHS. The consumption facility that Glasgow is about to open is going to sit in the NHS. I mean, £2.3 million for 1 year to run a small consumption room. It's absolutely mental. I mean, you could run, 3 or 4 facilities in Scotland for that same cost if it was just restructured in terms of how it's delivered, and it would have exactly the same safety, exactly the same, ability to, offer people the help and the support into the other types of help and support that they need around their house and around the social determinant stuff. There's no actual there's no more benefit to running these facilities like the way that the Scottish government are running them. And the diamorphine is the most frustrating one for me. Like Nicola Sturgeon said in 2021, just after I met with her in the Scottish Parliament, that there would be widespread access to heroin-assisted treatment throughout Scotland, and the funds would be made available for that this financial year. So that was April 2021. We've got no more heroin-assisted treatment than we had nearly 3 years ago. And there's one site in Glasgow now. Cranstoun as an organisation deliver diamorphine treatment in England, and we are doing it at a third of the cost of Glasgow, like literally a third of the cost because of the way that it's structured and delivered. Now, we've presented this model to Scotland on various occasions to the previous drug policy minister, spoke to Nicola Sturgeon about it, spoke to Angela Constance about it, spoke to the current drug policy minister, Eleanor Whittam, about it, but because of the way that they're medicalising it, that's never been taken forward. So frustrating.
Again, it's if they move it from if it's in a criminal realm, they can't listen to the drug users. They're criminals. If it's in
Yeah.
the medical realm, we can't listen to these people. They're patients. They're ill.
Yes.
There's always a fucking way they find to remove our voice, to hear our words and our arguments, and somehow run it through this machine in their brain, and it go, oh, here's how I can make money from them. Here's how I can continue my supremacy. Here's how I can continue to inculcate and indoctrinate and force them into feeling less than,
Yeah.
somehow not as entitled as others because of the manifestations of their desires to consume certain compounds. I don't judge you if you want to eat a 12 box of Krispy Kremes a fucking day. I
Yeah.
don't care.
Exactly.
I wouldn't,
Exactly.
because I know what that would do to my health, or what I believe it would do to my health. I don't think about what it'll do to your health because that's your fucking shit, not mine. And
And that's the kicker, man. It's the kicker, right? See, the kicker is whether they put it in health or they put it in criminal justice. Both of those things cost just as much.
it makes
You know,
money
like
for them, the consultants and the system and the man, and it
exactly.
self justifies. We need this extra money for our administration and for our offices and bureaucracy to administer justice, to
Yes.
protect the public. It's so fucking Orwellian and
Yeah.
painful. And I have so many compatriots and comrades in this space that are just cannabis drug exceptionalists that are
Yeah.
going to skip over this episode. I hope you haven't. Thank you if you fucking haven't and you've heard this. Because to truly understand the argument is there is no difference between a crack pipe and a bong. Get at me. There's just
Yeah.
not. You may say this, that, the other. If you could give me examples of individuals of things that you've seen in your own life, but I put it to you that if you were born them, raised as them, lived as them, and acted as them right now, you would fucking be them. You would be facing the same persecution. You would understand why they act as they do because it would just be what you would do to survive. It's a bullshit system that they've got us attacking each other. When, as you say, it's whether they realize it or not, whether there is a grand conspiracy or not, those seeking to help at the top are making the situation fucking worse.
Yeah, and the only way that we're going to come together is if, you know, to sort of, I suppose, come full circle from where we kind of began, is if we come together as a community. You know, like, see, my drug exceptionalism is I don't like cannabis. I'm telling you right now, like, I don't like the effects of cannabis. I don't like the way that it makes me feel. I don't like the psychoactive experience of it. However, you know, I like the psychoactive experience of other drugs, you know, and I like the experience of other drugs, but there is no way that I would advocate for heroin or MDMA or 2CB to become a substance that is legal because of my experience and because I like the interaction of those drugs with me while saying, ah, fuck you, you're a cannabis user, like, I don't like that drug. That drug should be illegal, you know.
Yeah.
Like, we need to come together, and that's how things have changed in other countries, because drug using communities are bonded together in a common purpose to fight for our own rights and bodily autonomy.
Yeah, man. I couldn't agree more, and I've been advocating this for a while within the cannabis space, is that we have to look outside, because all of the effort and the best intentions of some of the most wonderful people I've known across the world in this space are just building the bars of their future prison. The systems are already manifesting. They're already investing and controlling every outcome, and they've co-opted our language. They've infiltrated our ranks, and they are moving us, marching us, sleepwalkingly into reform, legalization. These buzzwords, these phrases that are actually not going to equate to your freedom. All they're going to really equate to is maybe a bit of token limited access, but ultimate increased financing for them, a stronger authoritarian position, a resurgence in the concept of the war on drugs, the war on us. That's what I think we've never got closer collectively than we are right now to having the wider conversation of going, whoa, right. So the Canadians are saying there's no such thing as a safe limit of alcohol, and that it's comorbid in at least 9 cancers, that it's got a dependency rate of da-da-da-da-da-da. Yeah, that's cool, and we're leaving that there. Yet 2 weeks ago, they're raiding Dana Larson for fucking selling mushrooms. It's when people then go in the UK and they go, okay, so let's look at these drug deaths. Let's have a fucking look at this. And you go, oh, tobacco, shit, alcohol, shit. You go, again, if we put fucking sugar is where it should be as a drug. Do you know what I mean? Even like caffeine is consequential in terms of the deaths that it can cause and it actually being fatal. There's many more things that we need to understand, that as if you look at again what a drug fucking is, you look at an Oxford Dictionary definition of a drug being something that has a physiological or psychoactive effect. That's every fucking thing. And to something, people they're drugs, to others they're foods, to me like an essential medicine. Like you say to yourself, somebody doesn't like cannabis, but what I've always respected about yourself, and I've told you this, is that you don't care because you understand the fucking argument, and that's what I respect and really admire. Is that people like yourself that can get that, you know what, I don't need to. Like, yeah, I have dabbled in cocaine here and there. It doesn't quite, for me, I get to a certain point and I'm like, no, can't, done. Same with alcohol.
I can't. Yeah, I'm not. Cocaine's one of those things as well. Like, it's like you have to redose with cocaine every like.
And it's the cost of it. I'm there. I'm doing the math. I'm just more aware doing the math, and probably because ADHD brain and being assessed for autism or whatever. As I've said, amphetamine, like not hyper normal. I'm just grounded. I'm like, I don't know if there's an episode of Futurama where Fry drinks 300 cups of coffee and he hits the 300 coffee and the world just slows right down and he can just move through it at super speed. That's what amphetamine feels like to me. And again, I can understand then why they're using different molecular structures of amphetamine-based drugs for treatment of ADHD, because it quietens my brain, it slows me down, it gets through. So
Yeah, I
this
mean,
is
things like Adderall as an example, like Adderall should be readily available to people, like it heightens senses, it like gives people an ability to work better, to, communicate better, to, you know, be able to deal with life, when life can sometimes feel like people can't deal with it. These types of substances, there's so much potential for them, but at the moment we're not recognizing that potential.
I think it's the other thing we've got is the loss of society. I mean, I often describe it. Me and my mate talk about this often, like real often, and I always say I think it's the loss of myth, of narrative, of a grander vision within not just the UK but the West in general. Like my generation, we ain't getting married, we ain't having kids. There's no
Yeah,
inclination. There is no desire or drive there. Most obviously, yeah, we kind of gravitate together, but most of my friends and the people that I know of my age, unless it's an accident and they kind of almost get guilted into it by family, or there's some instant resurgence of the Catholic or Christian upbringing in youth, they tend to be like, no, this is not my life, this is not what I want, sort of thing. And I think society needs to form and change around this. And we look at in the past 3 years, no, past five, I'm trying to get the stat right. In the past five, no, it is 3 years. In the past 3 years, we've lost 32% of night venues, music venues in the UK. We've lost what we were at 20 pubs a week were closing prior to COVID. God knows what that's going to be now. The number of cafes, social spaces. The drugs are not the fucking issue. When people have a problem, the drugs help recalibrate. They help give you a break from it. Like me and my mate many years ago, we used to do Blues and Blueies, which was we watch Blu-rays and take Valium. And it would be we'd relax together, and I would basically he had issues with other sort of substances, and I really enjoyed that experience, but I didn't really have enough of an excuse to do it in my own life, and it just became a really good twinning of these things. It became really positive experiences for both of us, and it wasn't until then adulterated supplies and literally hearing about people going, "Nah, that one's a 50 and that one's a 4 or a 5 like mil," and you're like, "What?" And you're like, it's okay. It didn't then have the same kind of reward or space for it, and I think that an education and awareness, and I've been lucky through all of that always having cannabis as my base. But if you then
yeah,
took away cannabis, that's when I went to other drugs. I mean, when I'm needle phobic and I had a massive problem with like dental pain for a couple of years, I nearly overdosed on several prescription drugs because I just kept getting to a tolerance with one drug and go, fuck, I have to switch off an opioid and go to this. I have to switch off this and try this. And
yeah,
and again, it's the drugs that I'd never have ever seen. They're just tools. They are just fucking tools. And the same way my body goes, I am hungry. I go, oh, what for, body? Go in the kitchen. Oh, this, and I know what I need or want in that moment, and I can speak of it like this, and people may judge me for this, and I don't give a fuck about it because it is the same thing to me. I know what my body wants, and if prohibition and the propaganda and all that bullshit was parked away on one side of it, there would be no different than my preference of going and getting a pizza or going and making this for dinner or having that. That's what it should be down to. If we then find consequences in that, we create regulation, we create education, we invest in funding, improving these suspicions, these theories, so we have an evidence base from which to move. There has
yeah.
never been an evidence base for drug policy in the UK, ever.
No, no, and the evidence is not like evidence is not the thing that's going to change people's minds. It's the emotions. It's the emotions that's going to change people's minds. So I think that's what I tend to try and focus on. The emotion of being somebody who's been punished and criminalized for my drug use. Who's used drugs in a way that's not been conducive with being healthy or productive in life, to now being a person through the education and the love of harm reduction has an ability to use drugs in a way that is conducive if I want to and when I want to, but only because of the the people around me and the settings that I take those drugs in. Like that's what's going to change. That emotional aspect of it. And even if that's the emotions of people not having to pay lots of money to send people to prison, the taxpayer, like because the taxpayer, people who pay taxes in the UK are paying so much more taxes than they need to pay if we just change the way that we approach drug use as a whole.
Or even better, those taxes, obviously, yeah, I'd like to see a reduction, but could be put to better uses in society to,
Yeah,
again, have that twinage that when the drugs that realign you, as I was sort of saying before, that you can then go from that back into society. So as a consequence of that, I noticed, say, confidence was helping. It was around a time when I was quite agoraphobic. I then found that as a consequence of interacting with this substance every week, in a regular sort of basis with this individual, that then I was able to kind of go out more. I was kind of able to do more. And I
yeah,
think
yeah,
that it's, again, as we're kind of alluding to, is that people have to be free to experiment and to understand how things work, and that one's experience cannot dictate another's. And I think
yeah.
that's where we have to get past with this. We are even I'm a northerner that doesn't drink, so there's still a great suspicion of people when you go out and you're like, you want to put no, no, no. I'll have, like, I think I had a drink at Christmas last year, maybe, like it was a token thing, but it is literally like one or two, as an almost the social convention. It's feeling welcomed in the same way I imagine some people do when a joint's going around and oh, we'll have a couple. It's because you want to feel included. You want to feel it's
Yeah, yeah,
that community thing, and I think that's what we're missing, is that while we're all online and doing everything, our commons, our social collective spaces are being erased. I mean,
yeah,
through hostile architecture as a way to deal with unhoused individuals. You know, the war on drugs. To me, we need to get rid of public toilets. You know, terrorism. So we need to get rid of bins in parks and fucking all this other things, and all the economics. So we're shutting this and that, and it's we need to be out together to see that we are not a threat to each other. And they've got us so wound up and believe in this shit. And no matter what drug you take, if you take it in isolation, it's going to have more of a negative impact than if you did it with others, because there's a self titrating effect with all of these
yeah,
things. There's a self regulatory thing. And I say this, or you should at least get your education and your sea legs. I think in most drugs in a social setting, dependent on the drug, obviously, things with an overdose potential, you should work together in pairs. But I mean, I take like a lot of psychedelics and things like yeah, DMT mushrooms. I'll take MDMA out into the woods and I'll go spend like a week in the woods, build a shelter, and I've learned to know how to handle and do that through the introduction that I had as a youth. Do you know what I mean? In those experiences. And I think we have to create that social mechanism of harm reduction that is organic. It naturally evolves in the same way it does as a pub where, you know, Dave's had too many in the barman guns, cut him off. Doorman's like, I'll keep an eye on him. You know, somebody's already outside pulling him a taxi. You know, the Mike guns, you know, oh lad, we'll get you some up from the chip shop on the way home. And it's all that potential thing that could have gone one way is immediately handled in a way that nobody thinks of it. There's no judgment, there's no nothing. There is just, it is what it is. And I think if we can apply that mechanism to other drugs, then all of society will benefit economically, like socially, in terms of the the expressions of humanity that people have. Whereas we all treat each other with such suspicion, because frankly, more of us are taking drugs than ever before in this country. We're
yeah,
all, I mean, everybody I know that goes out now. And you're going out is a couple of bags, you know what I mean? And it's a huge market for cocaine at the minute because of, again, coca-ethylene. There's not really much understanding of what is then happening with that and what that mechanism may be treating. And again,
yeah,
to me, it's an awareness problem. If you are aware of our current reality in this country and the state of the world, I think you've got a high propensity of wanting to use drugs to escape it.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And that's some of the base story taking drugs anyway, isn't it? It's about a bit of escapism. It's about getting away, changing your reality. And I get that whole psychedelics thing as well. Like that's a nice way to change your reality and have some lovely experiences.
A good way to really find yourself as well. I often
Yeah,
will take intention, it's going to sound very hippie-ish, take intention or a question into like pipe work. I've got a sort of ceremonial pipe, and whether it's Changa or DMT or whatever it may be, take something into the experience, and then 9 times out of 10, I've kind of made up my mind. It's like the trick of, flipping a coin. If you've got a decision you need to make, and there's like two options, you know as soon as you flick it what you want the result to be. So that's what you really feel. It's kind of the same sort of thing that I personally feel from my experience. I go through a mechanism of being able to really ascertain what I feel and think about this certain thing. I think there are certain substances, especially when taken in conjunction with cannabis, like fecal full extract oil at high dose, which can be psychedelic, I think, in its own self, gives you this kind of real locked in introspection. I think it's the same kind of benefit that people get from ketamine and the K-hole experience is the
Yeah.
cessation of other neurological and physiological activity that forces I think the superego, the thing beyond who we think we really are, and our quietened impulses, and we're just kind of stuck processing, looking at in some way these manifestations of our own of ourself, our own interpretation of ourself, and then come out of that experience, whether we know it or not, with a rewired neurology, with up because they're both like neuroplastic agents, cause neuro sort of hemispherical interconnectivity. So parts of the brain just start firing off in different ways, and I think there's something massive in that to people being able to just go, oh, I don't want to do this. I don't. There's just it's a complete rewiring. And I again worry massively with the psychedelic renaissance, as we were talking about before, of the medicalization of this. Is that we're going to guide you through this. I mean, I've had experiences that at one time, I guess, maybe would have made me believe in not a monotheistic God, but maybe a deityistic kind of example of a God, or manifestation of one. I've had experiences that left me fully atheistic, like completely devoid, and then I'm generally on an agnostic kind of spectrum, but not to a belief of any of the preordained religions. I think that the Jainist or Buddhist concept of like akasha and all experience being out there is something I sort of ascribe to, and the life is God in all of us. I am God, you are God, everyone is God, but that is not the one God hiding in all of us. The fact that we are alive. I mean, there's a line in the is it the I can't remember what the hell book it is. Is it from Hinduism? Is it the Upanishad book, I think, and it basically states that it's talking about like Brahma, the eternal, like the Godhead, and it basically saying that the about it's a poem. It's not that which the eye can see, but that which by the eye can see. Not that which the ear can hear, but that which by the ear can hear. Know that to be Brahma the eternal, and not what you hear adore. And it's basically the idea is to not get lost with what is. That's not the thing. The thing is that it is, not what it is. That it can be. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's what the psychedelics have taught me and grounded me to. And I've had such humbling experiences. You know, I've partially told my LSD story on here where I had a complete meltdown and went through all of these transformations of different animals, and that's how I kind of basically became vegan. And yeah, I think that they are powerful tools and substances, but we have to have a certain awareness and understanding of what they are, and to not allow ourselves to be drawn by others. You know, if you've ever read like Chaos, the book on Charles Manson, if you've ever looked into MK Ultra and what the CIA did with LSD or any of the extended Sandoz experiments, they basically were trying to create a weapon of influence, a drug of influence. And again, to the Manson family, he weaponized LSD, is Charlie Manson. And so I worry that whether they intend to or not, there'll be imprinting from the medical professionals, from the spaces they create, from their procedures and processes that will drive the experience and thus the outcome. And if they, man, say something or whatever, and they go, oh no, no, to this or whatever, do you know what I mean? It can mold the experience and thus the outcome. And maybe that's just my personal suspicions of a real terrible experience of several of the authoritative mechanisms of apparatus in this country over many decades. But I just again worry that we need to be free to to express ourselves. And if that's me, camping shirtless around a fire with mushrooms chanting, that's medicinal to me. That's my medicine. That's my medicine. That's
Yeah.
my shit. That's where I ground myself. I find myself. That's where I feel human enough to come back to this bullshit, these concrete cages and these games that we play and these lies that we tell. And without
Yeah.
without those experiences, I don't fucking know. I don't know. You know what I mean? I don't know how I would deal with the world around me. But if then the system goes, we're suddenly gonna legalize psilocybin, and you can come and spend $2,000 a session, and you're allowed one mushroom, and we're gonna measure your body waves, and you're gonna be under this fucking light. You've got to wear this over your eyes and listen to our music. Like, That's torture to me. That is an idea of fucking torture.
Yeah, and that's that. It all comes again that sort of down to that over institutionalization and medicalization of things, and I think that's why we're always going to see there's going to be some sort of underground market, because people want to have their own experiences and do these things in the way that they want to do them without any commercialization or state surveillance.
It's rituals. There's something in us about the ritual. Listen to anybody that like smokes cannabis or whatever, they'll tell you about the rolling of the joint or the packing of the bong and their process and their favorite lighter, their bong, their rig. They have such an augmented attachment in that they have the emotional love of these things that they can't express and manifest in these objects, and they sit there with pride, and do you know what I mean? The whole thing is self-reinforcing. They are parking part of their humanity into it, dealing with whatever they fucking got to, swallowing what they fucking got to, not rising to whatever they are not allowed to rise to, and having to play the game they have to play, coming back to that. And in that ritual, that prepping the needle, that prepping your fucking pipe, that doing whatever it is that you do, that you stepping back into where you are grounding yourself into your humanity. And for another, I want to fucking cry here, man. And for another fucking for another human to step to that and go, no,
Yeah.
you're doing that wrong. While with a cigarette and a pint, going Friday night, lads, Friday night, lads. And and again, I'm not being a drug supremacist or fucking whatever. It just breaks my heart that to me it is so blindingly, painfully obvious, no matter the drug, that it is the same thing of grounding, of reconnecting, and the pomposity, the arrogance that in 2023, with all the things that we're learning and doing on one side of the world and in one phase of reality, that we can't have this rational conversation, that billions is now being made, that millions cumulatively probably over the world are going to be prescribed these things now, that that markets are altering, that fuck, there was a German company approached the Taliban to grow cannabis over fucking there. So in a world where they could potentially go from opium to then growing cannabis, like if we're going to give the people their ritual, give the people that want to grow their one plant outside that every morning want to go and look at it, and have that grounding, connective experience to nature. You can't deny that. If scroll that up again, and this is going to hurt some of my fucking cannabis only audience listeners, the prepping of the fucking needle, the whole thing of it, the little kit. I mean, I was a self harmer for many years, and I remember vividly telling my psychiatrist about I had a special kit, my little zip little pack, and have certain razors, different fucking, like, a gold plated one that was fucking double serrated, so it's sharper than fucking shit. You'd have a smaller, like the pencil sharpening ones, and different grades, and the whole thing of it, and explaining the comfort of just knowing I had that somewhere and I could go back to that. Do you know what I mean? And it's knowing that you've got your little thing, and you have to hide it because we have to fucking hide these things. And wherever it is, it's there. It's somewhere across the vastness of the human experience. There is something that you have that comfort in. And again, to me, that we can look at that as another human. It's like children going, gives you a blanket. Like, it's so just fuck you. Do you know what I mean?
No, I get you, man. I get you.
Yeah.
There's high levels of frustration, but we'll get there.
We will indeed. Let's try and end this on more of a positive note then, because I've let my emotion get the better of me there. But I rarely get to speak on other drugs on this platform, because there's so many other things I want to talk to usually about other guests. Whereas this, what I've always appreciated about yourself sort of coming on, is being able to teach people that otherwise wouldn't think of these things, to maybe have an opportunity to learn again from lived and living experience and from these conversations, and to go away and do, as always, your own research and just start thinking in a different way. And as you say, if we can get ourselves to come together and recognize that it is those that would seek to arbitrarily, to incorrectly, to immorally inflict their prejudice and preference on us, they are the enemy. And only in that ideology. I don't mean that in their humanity. They're still people at the end of the day, and I don't know what damage has been caused to them for them to take such a fucking stance, what pay is in their pocket to make them take such a stance. but it is the idea that needs attacking, not the fucking people. We need less of this bullshit of us attacking each other as people. It's ideas and concepts. We need to talk this shit out.
Yeah, it's emotions, man.
Yeah. So that all being said, two final questions for you then, Peter. Where can people keep up with your work?
So yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm quite active on social media, mainly on Twitter, a little bit on Instagram, um, and it's Pete Krykant OPC for Overdose Prevention Centre. I've never changed it. That was what kind of first got me into the space and gave me the voice. I work for an organisation, as we've spoken about, called Cranstoun. People can Google Cranstoun. They can find out more about the work that we do, the advocating that we do, the drug policy reform campaigning that I do specifically through the organisation. So yeah, you can find me online quite easily just by googling my name, and as I say, googling the organisation's name. Yeah, that's the main areas.
Excellent. I'll include links below. I should be all right with Cranston. I've had a few issues. I've had a couple of warnings off YouTube because of some links to people's websites around the world that I've linked to for illicit activity, which is fucking jokes. But apparently, I can do some online little course now, and I've got to watch 7 slides, and YouTube
Right.
will lift my restriction, won't you, you bastards? So at some point, I'll sit down for their propaganda. But yeah, I'll include the links that hopefully YouTube will let me below. And I suppose my final question here is, what does the future hold for you, man? Where do you think you're going personally, professionally?
Well, like I'm really happy with Cranston. Like obviously I've been with them for quite some time, over 2 years now. Like we've spoke already, just this year alone. I've been afforded the opportunity to go to, lots of different countries: Australia, Mexico, America, Denmark, France, Belgium, Spain. Working on looking at international best practice when it comes to drug policy and harm reduction, and promoting Cranston as an organisation. And I'm happy in my current employment. I'm on a full-time permanent contract. I'm on a reasonably good salary. So and I see my future being with Cranston for quite some time to come. Further afield, I it's difficult to project into the future. Like I'd love to see, like ready access to drug testing and facilities, overdose prevention sites. I'd like to be maybe able to work specifically in those areas again. I would like to be frontline at some point, working directly with people who use drugs. I'd like to be talking to people about educational stuff around drugs, around taking drugs in safe environments with people that they trust, etc. And making sure that the experiences are safe and sound for people, as we hopefully change people's emotions and move forward with reform as a whole.
Excellent, excellent, great answers, and I wish you the best in all of it, brother. And I do hope, like I said, Scotland continues its trajectory, and we can continue to see these honest conversations happening, and hopefully this little island of ours can get caught up, because it's costing a lot of people their lives literally, and
Yeah.
ruining, lessening, dampening, destroying many more.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
respect as always for everything you do, brother.
Thanks, man. It's been really good to chat.
Likewise, man. Likewise. Appreciate you taking the time. Yeah, I'll include links to everything below. I will let you get off now, and I will do some housekeeping. And yeah, I'll drop you links when it's edited and ready to go next week, or the end of this week. End of this week.
Amazing. Cool, man. Yeah, I better get on. I've got some meetings coming up this afternoon. It's a pleasure to chat, and I'll look out for it going live.
Excellent, excellent. All the best, brother. We'll speak soon.
Take care, mate. Thank you.
Right. Cheers. Peace. Bye.
Yeah. Bye.
Well, there you go, folks. That was Peter Krykant from Cranston. Yeah, really enjoyed that chat. I know I say that every week, but yeah, I really do enjoy these conversations, and I think it was a rather poignant one this week with Peter. Yeah, I always get pigeonholed, I guess, as a cannabis podcast, but I'm really obviously human rights, the human experience. It's more about sort of my life, as it were. Obviously, cannabis plays quite a big role in that, but so does drug consumer rights and sort of prohibition, abolitionist kind of ideology, beliefs, and actions and activity. And so it's a space that I keep quite an eye on. Is other drug law reform spaces, and I think Peter does some fucking fantastic work within it. So it's been great to catch up with him for the first time in a couple of years at this point. Um, so yeah, really, yeah, insightful. Good to catch up on sort of what's happening up in Scotland with drug reform there. I'll include some links below as well to some relevant materials, as well as to the links we've just discussed with Peter. But yeah, I hope you guys thoroughly enjoyed that. I shall not keep you much too longer. Yeah, if you really like this, please do give us a like, a share, a rating, a subscribe, all of those good things on whatever platform you are enjoying this wonderful thing from. And yeah, if you really, really enjoyed it, check us out on patreon.com/the Simpa Life, where for less than a cup of coffee a month, you can help me keep the lights on this little project of mine and keep, yeah, us going forever infinitum, which I'm going to do anyway, as long as there's a conversation to be had and my mental health will hold out. We're going to keep having these conversations. So yeah, really appreciate you taking the time as always, folks. Really hope you learned something new here. So yeah, you can keep up with us everywhere at Simpa Life on social media. Simpa Life website will be back soon. Fingers fucking crossed. I am still at war with Squarespace. Highly recommend you do not build your website with Squarespace. All right, folks, we'll be back next week with somebody. I don't know. Be awesome. You'll love it. All right. Peace and love, folks. See you next week. Well, there you go, folks. I hate this bit. As soon as I fuck it up once. Ah. Mm-hmm. 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 Okay, okay. Let's go. Let's go.